Hello, and welcome to today's IMA webinar, a panel discussion on improving the budget process. It's sponsored by IMA's Switzerland chapter and IMA's Performance Management Special Interest Group. I'm Larry White, your moderator. I'm a former global chair of IMA and currently IMA's board member on the COSO organization. In the background is the performance management SIG leader, Hessel Brouwer, you'll be hearing his voice when we get to the Q&A session at the end. I want to thank you for joining us again. A few housekeeping. Please note that you're muted on entry. Use the Q&A questions and the attendee chat to interact primarily with Hessel. He's in the background. You can type technical questions into the Q&A window for immediate assistance. The Q&A session will be held at the end of the presentation. Hessel will be looking at the questions and pulling those up that he thinks are most significant and of most general appeal. Poll questions will appear in the slides window. If you do not see the poll question appear, please refresh your internet browser. That usually solves the problem. A copy of the presentation will be available for download under related content, but I got to tell you, there's not much there for this presentation because it is a panel discussion. To receive full CPE credit for today, you need to attend the entire presentation, answer, I think, all but one of the polling questions, and ideally complete the evaluation form. We value your feedback, but that's not a requirement for CPE necessarily. The link to the recording will be emailed to all attendees, along with a link to download your CPE certificate about 1 hour after the webcast. Just a moment to talk about the shared interest group. The IMA recently, well, within the past year, created shared interest groups. This presentation sponsored by the Performance Management Special Interest Group, but there are about 5 or 6 more that you can become an active in. So we encourage you to use the links or the symbol to sign up if you're not already a member of a special interest group. So I want to take a minute just to introduce today's panel. Bjarte Voxness is chairman of the Beyond Budgeting Roundtable. Gary Kokens is a well-known author, and he is the founder of the analytics-based performance management advisory firm and has had a long career in activity-based costing. Greg Hogard is the vice president at Versova, vice president of finance at Versova Management Cooperative. And Russ Porter is an assistant professor of finance at Sacred Heart University, Jack Welch College of Business and Technology. I might also add that Russ was for several years the very capable and high-performing CFO of the Institute of Management Accountants, and we certainly appreciate his continued involvement with the IMA. So I'm going to start today with a polling question before we get into the actual panel discussion. So you can answer this polling question as soon as it comes up. What is the status of your 2025 budget? Still valid today, obsolete but not replaced, obsolete and replaced by an updated budget, or we simply do not use a budget? Okay, I'm getting a really small number of people answering this question. So I want to encourage you, I think you can just click on A, B, or C, and And if you're having trouble, if it's not responding, refresh your browser. I'm gonna hold off just a second. I usually like to wait till I get to 90% of the people answering, but it's really slowed down. There we go, a few more. Okay. Well, I just want to point out for anybody that's having a great deal of difficulty, if you miss one question or maybe even two, it's not fatal to you collecting CPE. So, well, we're just about at 90%. I'm going to go ahead and see how we've come out. So, very interesting. Still valid today, almost half. Obsolete but not replaced, about 21%. Obsolete and replaced by an updated budget. And a small number, but this is surprising to me, simply don't use a budget. Okay. All right, I'm going to put us back up on this slide, and we're going to start with the first panel question. For this question, we're going to just go with very short answers to just get things started. So the first question is, what is the major problem with traditional budgeting in your view? And we'll go to Russ first.
Well, you know, Larry, that polling question really says it, is the idea that we create a budget for the year, and by the time it's actually in print, it's already obsolete. And that lack of flexibility to adapt to changing conditions throughout the year can really be seen as one of the major impediments to having a budget viewed as realistic and as a valued financial tool.
All right, Greg, what's your thought?
I have to agree with Russ. I think that traditional budgeting is myopic, it's static. It doesn't give you what you need to be successful in this dynamic world.
Okay. Gary, problems with traditional budgeting.
I had two. One, it's typically not volume sensitive. So as volume and mix of future next year's products, services change, the budget tends to be more like on a spreadsheet. And the other is, I agree, it's out of date, relatively quickly. But what really concerns me is there's a lot of gamesmanship, especially to the veteran, long-term bald hair, white hairs like some of us who know how to play games, padding the budget that's submitted. So we got to take some of the gaming out of the picture.
Bjarta?
Well, I agree with everything said about the kind of inflexible and all this stuff, but I think that this gaming issue is maybe the most serious problem. All the, at least borderline unethical behaviors that the budget triggers, the lowballing, the gaming, the sandbagging, the resource hoarding, the frenzy, December spending. That's not the kind of behavior we would like to see between colleagues. And in addition, I think it is a disaster for good decision making, because the budget forces us to make decisions too early. We need to decide in the fall, the year before, what we shall do next year, what they shall cost. And very often, too many of these decisions are taken too high up. That's not necessarily where the best information is sitting.
All right, very good points. Now, this question may be more challenging since we were very quick to come up with a lot of negative points. What is something positive about traditional budgeting? Ross?
Yeah, and notwithstanding the comments about the gamesmanship, a really well done budget, number one, eliminates those incentives, allows for the flexibility to adapt to changing conditions and therefore not do the December purge of your budget. But the most important thing it does is it provides the framework for alignment of objectives. Again, done well, it provides a framework to align objectives from the CEO down to all the managers and all the staff to allow them to make the decisions consistent with the company strategy.
Okay. Gary, something positive. I mean, Greg, I'm sorry, it's Greg's turn. Greg, something positive about the traditional budget.
Well, it definitely gives you a starting point, that framework that Russ was talking about. You can't manage what you don't measure. So you really, if you have a robust annual budgeting process, it does give you something to measure against. It's definitely better than nothing.
Okay. Gary, something positive.
The budget's in the language of money. There are a lot of managers that money is outside their comfort zone. I mean, they're okay with physical measures, pounds, speed, throughput, inventory control, but money matters, and you need to have some form of controls.
Okay. Bjarta, you have an answer for something positive about traditional budgeting?
I do, actually. It does allow us to sit down once a year and have a good talk about the future. And that makes sense. And that is something we should continue to do, even if we go beyond budgeting, as I will come back to.
Okay. Terrific. Thank you, gentlemen. We're going to go to the next polling question. So everybody wake up and move back to your eyes back to the screen. How is the budget process perceived in your organization? A, true planning reflecting strategy. B, a top-down directed outcome. C, a game of liar's poker or get what you can. Or D, a long drawn-out process of questionable value. So go ahead and put down your answers. I distinctly did not put all of the above or any combination, so I'm kind of forcing people to pick the one that jumps out at them the most.
I was about to make that comment, Larry, because I'm looking at this and I'm like, in every organization I've been in, I would absolutely have chosen two of these at least.
Yeah.
But okay. It does make you, this does force you to make a decision about which one is the most prominent in your organization.
So, okay, we're up to 70%, 72% of people answering. Last time we got up to 84. Anybody else out there that wants to answer? Remember, if you're having trouble, refresh your browser to answer the question. Okay, we're up to 81. I think we're going to go and see what responses we got. Well, this is actually pretty positive. Half the people view it as a true planning reflecting strategy, which is great. A top-down directed outcome for about a quarter, which is maybe a little lower than I would have expected. A game of liar's poker or get what you can, fortunately pretty low. And a long drawn-out process of questionable value did jump out at a pretty good number of people. So back to the panel. And this time you have the panelists have a little more time to answer. What should be the outcome for an organization of a good planning and resource allocation process? Bjarta, we'll start with you.
Well, first of all, for me, planning and resource allocation is, it's not for me, planning is broader. Resource allocation is about cost management. But if I address the resource allocation part of this, I mean, what we're after is a process where decisions are made regarding cost are made at the right time and for the right reasons. And unfortunately, traditional budgeting, cost budgeting, kind of fails. I mean, again, we are forced to make these decisions too early in the fall. Too many of these decisions are made too high up, and very often, I mean, decisions against the cost budget are not necessarily made for the right reasons. So and that is why, again, as I will come back to, beyond budgeting offers much more intelligent and effective ways of managing cost than what a 100-year-old management technology can offer us, because that's actually how old budgeting is. We tend to forget that.
Okay, thank you. Russ, what's your observation? What should be the outcome of a good organizational budgeting process?
You know, to Bjarte's point, too many people look at the budget, the outcome, as being the financial outcome, and everybody gets a department spending cap, I'll call it. But in my mind, the real benefit of a budgeting process is the process, not the actual plan. I think it was Dwight Eisenhower who said, plans are useless, planning is everything. What I would look for in a budget process is that managers across functions, across hierarchical levels, they come to a common understanding of not only the environment and the market that the organization faces, but really it's about the operational levers that the company can pull through the year to adapt their approach to changing market conditions. And also knowing when they need to pull those levers. I'll give the example here in the United States. Right now, higher education is dealing with a real crisis as it relates to international students, and a high degree of uncertainty for this coming fall about what our international student population is going to be. So many organizations, many colleges and universities have to now adapt very quickly and say, what available levers do we have? Some of them are digging deeper into their endowments. Others are lowering tuition a little bit in order to get more students in the door. Still others are looking at their programming and implementing cost reductions. The best organizations know these levers as a part of their planning process, both the positive, that opportunities that they can go after, but also reacting to negative market conditions, and a common understanding of what those levers are and what the organization is capable of doing in light of those market conditions. I think that's the best outcome you could get out of a budgeting process.
Great, thank you, Russ. Greg, what do you think is the best outcome for an organization from a really good planning and budgeting process?
I think it should lead to action. There's a debate that I have often heard in the budgeting cycle, whether the plan should be a target-based or a historically achievable plan. What I've seen every time that there's a target-based budget, I oftentimes see that leads to inaction from the operations team. I would highly recommend grounding a plan in reality. And then, as Russ said, that process of budgeting should inform the whole team. And as you have an informed team that knows that the budget is achievable, I think you could get a lot of action out of a very good budget process. Something that I would like to stress as well, I do think that if you do that process more than once a year, granted it takes a lot of companies a lot of time to do it, but there are some processes we could talk about that where you can do it more than once a year. You get the opportunity to train your business leaders on those levers that can affect, that can help enact change from the process. So action, in my mind, is really what shows a successful planning and resource process.
Great, thank you. Gary, what do you think should be the outcome of a good planning and budgeting process?
Well, as a preface, I earlier said that it should be volume sensitive, and my undergraduate degree from Cornell was industrial engineering. So I think capacity resource planning is really sort of like part of the operating thinking. But Larry, if it's okay, I want to maybe digress to, let's talk about what is traditional budgeting. And the way I have observed it, many companies, and I'll try to do this in 45 seconds, is they give every line manager a spreadsheet, January to December, with their ledger accounts. They fill it out. Then someone in the accounting department consolidates them. They bring in a sales forecast. They give that first draft to the executives, and they don't like the number. We call these executive tweaks. So go change some of the numbers. So the spreadsheets go back. People lower some of their expenses. Back to the consolidation, up to the executives. It's a little bit better, but not good enough. Up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. Come on. You almost want the executives to say, what number did you want in the first place? So we don't have to go through all this spreadsheet manipulation, but that would give us their aspiration. And I think the key to a good budget is modeling. And we do need capacity resource planning. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. I was a division controller age 27. I'm 76 now, but yeah, I still think like an engineer. This is really engineering more than accounting.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move to a third polling question with those thoughts in mind. And again, if you're having trouble with the polling question, refresh and you can start answering right now. You don't have to wait for me to read the question. How much time does your organization spend on the annual budget? A, less than a week. Wouldn't that be great if this was everybody's answer? B, between a week and a month. C, between a month and a quarter. D, between a quarter and a half a year, and E, more than half a year. Anyone have a thought about where this one's going to come out?
You didn't put the answer too long.
Yeah. I'm just gonna speculate that C might be the most common answer, but we're up to 74%, so we're gonna find out in a minute. I'm going out on a limb here.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if we could see the split between smaller businesses versus larger organizations. I think you find a lot of, to Gary's point, a lot of up down iteration in the larger organizations.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ross. All right, let's see. We're up to 83%. That's 86. That seems to be about where we're leveling off at. So let's take a look. Okay, some people do it in less than a week. And we've got between a week and a month with a pretty healthy percentage. Between a month and a quarter is the biggest number, as I predicted. And on the fortunate side, the numbers are a little lower on the high side. So I'd say that's a better than expected outcome for me. So let's move on to the next panel question. What innovations or processes do you recommend for replacing traditional budget or for making it more effective? And Greg, you're up first.
I would recommend implementing an integrated business planning process. The first time I was a controller, about 15 years ago, I was asked every month as part of the financial close to predict how we were going to end the following month. And that was a little different than what I was used to previous to that. So when I started that process, I was kind of a lone man trying to just look in a crystal ball and figure it out. And what I realized is that I don't have a crystal ball and I'm not good at it. So I started looking at all the drivers, all of the levers, and who owned those drivers and levers, and realized that I really had very little control as a controller over what happened in the business. So we pulled together a group of leaders in the business and had weekly meetings where we discussed operational performance and inventory optimization. We really started driving things home, and I realized there was actually I learned about integrated business planning, that was actually a process for budgeting, and So it was interesting to see that the poll showed that some people can do their planning in a week. I would recommend to those people that they should look into integrated business planning, look into demand and supply reviews and inventory optimization and operational performance, and start doing that weekly, monthly, but once a week in that month. And start looking forward rather than backwards.
Well, great, thank you. Russ, what are your thoughts on innovations and processes to replace traditional budgeting?
Well, Greg, to your last point there, I think that there's probably a correlation between the respondents who said it take less than a week to do their budget and the first question, which was they didn't have a budget at all. Because if it takes you more than a week to build no budget, there's a different problem going on there. But I'll tell you, I mentioned the benefit of the budget is the shared understanding about the market and the business model and the context in which the organization operates, and therefore the flexibility to pull business levers and adapt to changing conditions. Gary, you talked about volume-based budgeting and being able to adjust based upon adjust your budget and adjust your spending plans based upon how your volumes are coming in. I think that's really key. But it's also about understanding when the environment in the market is changing, that's going to affect your volumes and being able to see that proactively. What we need to do is we need to do more scenarios. Very often I've seen a lot of budgets where you have one case, which is the expected case, and you have a best case and a worst case. I think we need to be a lot better as financial professionals helping to develop different scenarios. What if this environmental factor happens? What if that one happens? What if, I use the example of higher education. What if our international students suddenly dry up completely? In the US, we're looking at it that way. In Canada and the UK, they're looking at it saying, hey, this is a great opportunity. How do we go and attract those international students who aren't going to the US? And how do we get them to come, and how do we scale up our volume capacity to absorb and get these international students in our front door? And so being able to say that my two favorite words in budgeting are what if? What if this happens? What if that happens in the market? What if our biggest competitor suddenly goes out of business? What does that mean for us? Being prepared for that and being able to jump on opportunities or react quickly to challenges because we've already pre-thought them, I think that innovation will help managers at all levels think differently about how to respond to a dynamic market.
Oh, great, Russ. Bjarte, what innovations or process do you recommend for replacing traditional budgeting or making it more effective?
Well, I agree with everything that has been said. Integrated planning, scenarios, what if, but it's not enough, because we need to think bigger and bolder and more systematic around this big issue, because we need to challenge the assumptions behind not just budgeting, but what I call traditional management, of which budgeting is a key part. And traditional management is built on two assumptions. Number one, the future is predictable and plannable. And number two, you can't trust people. And those are the two things that we challenge in Beyond Budgeting, because that is not true. That is why we have developed a model with 12 principles, 6 on leadership, addressing people in leadership, like values, purpose, autonomy, transparency, and then 6 management processes activating these good intentions on leadership. And on those management processes, they start out with target setting, forecasting, and resource allocation as the 3 first of the management process principles. And those 3 are the reasons why we budget. We make budgets to set targets, to predict the future, and to manage cost allocated resources. But that cannot be combined in one process and one set of numbers. And I think Russ mentioned the dilemma: should your budget be ambitious or realistic? You need to be able to cater for both by separating these three into three different processes, allowing you to have ambitious targets while at the same time realistic expected outcome forecasts. And finally, to design a resource allocation process which is much more continuous, dynamic, much more intelligent and effective than what Mr. McKinsey could offer us 100 years ago when he invented this process. So this separation of budget processes is key in beyond budgeting. It is some people might find the whole model a bit big, a bit scary, talking about purpose and values and so on. But if you start out with separating the three purposes into three different processes, then you are on a beyond budgeting journey. Because when you start to improve each one, you get into bigger discussions. Target setting, what really motivates people? Resource allocation, do we need detailed travel budgets if we say we trust people? And so on and so on. So my simple and big answer to this question is beyond budgeting is the way to go. Nothing wrong with all the other stuff mentioned here, but it's you can't just tinker with this process. You need to radically change it. And that is what beyond budgeting is doing.
All right, thank you, Bjarte. We're going to move into our next polling question. So again, for all the those in the audience, you can begin answering as soon as you see the questions. What budgeting methodology do you currently use? Incremental from the previous budget, zero-based budgeting, business driver-based budgeting, and probably decided each period, continuous forecasting, or do you use, as Bjarte just described, beyond budgeting? Where do you think this one's going to fall? Greg, what's your guess?
I think we're going to see a lot of zero-based budgets or possibly resource-driven. Is that on here?
Business driver-based would be kind of like resource-based. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Okay.
It's funny you say that, because I would have expected incremental from the prior budget as being everybody's base. I mean, zero-based budgeting, it was a fad about 10 years ago, but to do that every year is a really hard process.
Yeah. Well, I was kind of leaning your way, Russ, but we'll see what our participants show. We're up to 72% of people responding. We seem to be kind of stalled out there. There's 74.
My guess is A, incremental budget. They take last year and give them 5% increase for inflation on every account.
Gary, you're a pessimist. You're a pessimist with Russ and I. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and flip and see what they actually said. And we pessimists may have been right. Incremental from the previous budget. A lot of people are still doing the work for zero-based. Driver-based, not so popular. At least there's not a lack of clarity. Continuous forecasting by a number, beyond budgeting, a little light. So I hope they're using a lot of those principles Bjarte described, because they certainly make some sense. Let's move on to the next question.
Yeah, Bjarte, don't take that low rating too bad. That's a huge business opportunity there.
I was not surprised. You would have seen different numbers in Europe.
Question number 4. What are some of the barriers to adopting more modern and agile performance management tools like beyond the budgeting? Bjarte, I'm going to let you go first on that one.
When I discuss beyond budgeting with executives and managers, finance people, there is one word that keeps coming up over and over again, and that is the word control. And the context is, of course, the fear of losing control. And what many of these guys haven't understood, that a lot of the controls they think they have through the budgeting process is nothing but illusions of control. But it might feel good to have next year described with a million details and decimals, but the only thing we know is that we don't know. But it can be painful to let go of these controls, but we have to. But that doesn't mean that we are losing control, because what we get instead is more of what we call good controls. Like, for instance, transparency, which we highly recommend. It's a great control mechanism. Another reason why this is challenging is that a lot of the other stuff out there offered from, for instance, the finance community, like take the balanced scorecard or OKRs or activity-based costing for that sake, it is just about adding on additional boxes on top of your existing management tool boxes, and it doesn't threaten anything. It's not dangerous, so it doesn't meet a lot of resistance. Beyond budgeting, as I've mentioned already, threatens a lot of essential and key management, more painful. So I'm not surprised that this takes time, but it should take time, because this is big stuff. But it is growing slowly, steadily, sustainably. We've been doing this now for 30 years, and more companies are adopting this. So this is going to happen. I don't care if it will be called beyond budgeting or business agility. It doesn't matter, but it will happen.
All right. Gary, what do you see as some of barriers to adopting more modern and agile performance management tools? And I just used an example of beyond budgeting, but you can pick whatever tool you prefer to apply.
I think to do what I think Russ referred to as volume-based budgeting, I'd really call it driver-based budgeting, is key. But in order to do it and get ready, you need really activity-based costing. And I know a lot of people immediately shrug, oh, it's too big, too complicated, doesn't work. But there are effective techniques to implement ABC systems in 2 to 3 weeks. But here's where I'm going. ABC is typically used for strategic profit margin analysis. But for the advanced companies that implement it, you can calculate your ABC model backwards, and we move to what's called activity-based budgeting or planning. And here's the key. I'm going to refer to my being the industrial engineer, in capacity management. I think it was my second semester freshman year at Cornell. Volume and mix times unit level consumption rates equals capacity required, meaning number and types of employees with their wages and salaries and spend with vendors and with suppliers. Where do you get those unit level consumption rates? You get it from the ABC system. Typical ABC models has 60 to 70 activities. Each of them has a unit level consumption rate. That helps you create profit margin reporting. But if you now forecast those activity driver quantities, now we're talking about the predictive view coming at us, multiply backwards, and it's that equation, volume and mix times unit level consumption rates equals capacity required. We've now really got to driver-based budgeting. And of course, since we know the budget's obsolete or out of date pretty quickly, the only independent variable is the forecast. So we can now expand or extend to driver-based rolling financial forecasts, and they will be valid because they're all based on modeling. The gaming, the politics is out of the picture. We're calculating the resources and then associating it with the language of money.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm going to, with those thoughts in mind, I'm going to expand this a little bit. Russ, would you like to take a shot at answering this as well?
Yeah, I wholeheartly agree with what Greg just talked about activity-based budgeting being an extension of activity-based costing, and I'm with you. It's all driver-based. You're thinking about the drivers, and you're putting in the context of our cost objects. But I also want to make sure that when we're talking about budgeting and planning, we're thinking about the external drivers as well. That is what's going on in the market, which will then impact our plans and therefore our budgets, either positively or negatively. And Bjarte, I take your point about the lack of trust and this fear of letting go of control. And I think that fear, combined with a lack of available time to make budgeting changes, is a real barrier. We're all familiar with how our organizations do budgets. And some of us have changed companies, and probably most of us have changed companies at some point and seen a different way of doing it. But within an organization, you've got a lot of people who know how the budget works. And those who know it best, by the way, are the ones who can game the system the best. I acknowledge that. But going and changing a whole process can lead to a lot of confusion and a lot of disorganization, especially in that year of implementation. In my history, we had 1 year, our CFO decided he wanted to embrace zero-based budgeting and get away from this, let's take last year and put on assumptions about change. We tried to implement zero-based budgeting. Well, that first year, it required every program to go through a thorough strategic investment review. It took an amazing amount of time and confused a lot of our line managers because they don't know this stuff the way that we finance people do. And in the end, we actually had to drop 6 months worth of work because we couldn't get it done in time for the board meeting. So that fear of lack of control, yes, I acknowledge that, but it's also a fear of implementing a new process organization-wide, which will inhibit leaders from taking on that challenge.
All right, thank you, Russ. We're going to move to the next polling question. Again, as soon as this question's up, you guys, the audience, can start to respond. Is improving the budget process a priority in your organization? A, we are satisfied with the traditional budgeting process. B, we are not satisfied with our budgeting process, but are not making any changes. C, we are in the process of changing our budgeting process. And D, we are already applying agile methods for performance management. So, boy, I'm a little bit torn on this. Given the responses so far, I guess if I were going on a limb, I'd say A will probably be the most common answer, but I could be dead wrong. Greg, you want to weigh in on that?
I'm kind of an optimist by heart, so I'm going to go with we are in the process of changing our budgeting process.
All right, optimism. That's
I
management
would agree,
accounting
Greg.
is really the optimist. Okay, Gary, I think that was you.
No, this is Gary. I'm the pessimist. I think it's going to be B. They're not satisfied, but they're not doing anything.
Okay, well, who agreed with that?
That's Bjarte. I agree.
Bjarte. Okay. We got the pessimistic contingent changed this time a little bit. So we're up to 77%. I think that's about as far as we're going to go. So if you haven't answered, select one. 79%, 81, and we're going to go take a look at the answers. Let's see what we got. 30% are satisfied, and the optimist won. They're in the process of changing. So that's good. I mean, I am a little disappointed to see there's not some more focus on agile methods, but hopefully, as a result of our conversation today, the seed will be planted. Okay, the next panel question. Budget process changes can take place either, kind of on a large scale organizationally, or sometimes just by changes that finance applies, often in the absence of full organizational support or just organizational indifference. So the question for the panel is, what's your key recommendation or tactic to gain organizational support for a budget change? What's the, I guess this is a soft skill question almost, but it might be a hard data question. What do you do to drive this? We're going to start with you, Gary.
I think it has to do with leadership. My observation is the best leaders and best executives in the past had the best answers. I don't think that's the case today. I think the best leaders and executives have the best questions. There's too much volatility, complexity, and uncertainty, for them to rely on their gut feel. But as leaders, if we can get them aware of some of the things we've been talking about during this, whether it's the beyond budgeting, the principles, driver-based, using consumption rates, and they understand it, then it's their opportunity to, if you will, transfer that knowledge down to their line managers to get the buy-in of the line managers. But it's important that they have the trust of the line managers. And I like Bjart always talking about trust, because leaders without followers, they're just taking a walk in the park. So we need leadership.
Okay, Bjarte, Gary kind of quoted you, but what's your view on the key recommendation or tactic to gain organizational support for changing the budget process?
I think it's very much about helping executives and managers and finance people, for that sake, to understand the kind of serious and systemic problems with traditional management, including budgeting. And one way of, because it is a process that very few are happy with, but they tend to see kind of the symptoms as for pain points, and not realizing that this is a much more deeper and systemic problem. And one thing we recommend is to do a survey in the organization to get out, what people out there really feel about this process. And especially in big organizations, executives might be really surprised about what they think and believe is a rational and good process, how dysfunctional it really is. So building that case for change through creating understanding of how serious problems we are actually facing.
Great. Ross, what's your recommendation or key tactic to gain organizational support for budget process changes?
So I'm going to pile on to the concepts of leadership and visibility here, and add to it engagement. The idea that we want people at all levels of the organization and across functional disciplines to be engaged in this kind of change. I hate to say it, but people in headquarters are not the experts, to Gary's point. People in finance, I hate to say this really to a bunch of finance people, but we in finance, we're not the experts on everything either. There is an amazing amount of talent, knowledge, and experience out in all the functions, from the CEO suite all the way down to the sellers and the people on the manufacturing floor. And the more that we engage people across the organization in helping to drive this change, listening to their concerns and responding to them in a productive way, the more we're going to get buy-in to getting processes like budgeting changed, and in a way that everybody feels that they're a part of the decision and they're committed to the outcome the organization wants.
Well, thank you. Greg, what's your recommendation or tactic to gain organizational support for change?
Bjarte mentioned in the last question, going back to that, about the illusion of control. I think, in the title that most of us have had or have now is controller, that doesn't mean that we have to be controlling. I think if we try to control who owns the budget, if we make it finance and accounting's budget, even just in word or even how we approach it, we'll lose that trust and ownership that the operations team needs to have. I think it's critical to let them own it. And if they own it, then they'll be more engaged, to Russ's point. And I think that understanding our own emotional weaknesses, our own biases, is where we start with that. I think acknowledging that that we don't have all the answers is very important as well. Gaining trust, being a leader. No one's going to follow us if we just mandate. So giving ownership and gaining trust, I think, would be my skills that I would use.
Great. Okay, so now we're gonna change the focus. That question was about what you can bring to the organization to make a complete organizational change. And we all know not everybody gets to talk to the organization or can influence the organization. So do you have a key recommendation that finance can implement without organizational approval, maybe to improve the budgeting process for what I like to think of are its customers throughout the organization? Bjarte, any thoughts on what finance can do?
Well, I'm coming back to my point about separation of the three budget purposes: target setting, forecasting, resource allocation, which is a great place to get started. It's simple, logical, tested, and again, having separated, you can start to improve each one in ways impossible when it was all bundled in one process and one set of numbers. So you can start to set much better targets. We recommend, for instance, where possible, to think in relative terms, set targets about how you shall, for instance, perform versus competition instead of relative targets, instead of absolute targets. Improve your forecasting process by letting it be a pure forecasting process. It's not a bid into a target negotiation. It's not an application for resources. It's just the forecasting process. You have nothing to gain by gaming on that. So that means that you can get out the bias in that process, getting much more reliable forecasts. And last but not least, finding more intelligent ways of managing costs than what the traditional budget offers. And one quick example from my previous employer, Equinor, one of Scandinavia's largest companies, energy. That company invests between 10 and 15 billion US dollars a year. That company has no traditional investment budget where you sit in the fall the year before and decide everything, exactly how much to invest, exactly split on which project. Instead, there is a much more agile process based on a very simple process. The bank is always open. So the line can always forward a project for approval and funding at any time. Yes or no depends on two things: how good is your project, and can we afford it as things looks today? So a much more dynamic resource allocation leading to making decisions at the right time, where you have better information, not just about the project itself, but also your capacity to fund it. So again, this purpose separation is key here. I've helped loads of companies all over the world getting started. With the big majority, this is where we started out. This is where it ends, because companies get braver along the way in how radical they think around these companies. Some companies actually end up skipping targets at all. I'm not saying that's where you should start, but that might be where you end up.
Great, thank you. Gary, what do you think? What's a change that finance can do without seeking total organizational approval?
I think finance has to improve its soft skills. Most CFOs, controllers, probably the majority of people listening to this panel discussion are what I refer to as Newtonians, like Isaac Newton, the physicist. To them, the world's a big machine. Give me the levers, the pulleys, the dials. What they need is to be somewhat Darwinian, like Charles Darwin, biologist, sense and respond. Where I'm going here is, how do you get the buy-in of line managers and employee teams and even the executives to be open-minded to basically deviating or departing from that traditional, budgeting process and include some of the things we're talking about. I liked what Russ said about basically delegating, and beyond, we haven't talked that much, but one of the things I really admire about beyond budgeting, and you may correct me, is what I call basically giving managers employee decision rights. They're closer to the action. So by having the decision rights to influence, I think becomes important, as opposed to like top down, kind of shove down the throat from the executives in a top down budgeting process. So to me, it's the need for soft skills, and then the consequence is getting the buy-in for the for reforming the budgeting and rolling financial forecast process.
Russ, what do you think are some things that finance can change about budgeting and planning to make it more effective without seeking total organizational support?
So there is a lot to be said about the development of soft skills within the finance community. And open. I expect that some of our listeners are in a place where they're in a smaller business where, you know, the bank is small, and they actually have to go and talk to a banker before they can get money. That's part of the challenge, though, and that's part of the reason why I think we all lead to the controlling methodology, is because you only need one set of empowered executives or empowered managers to make some really big bets that go badly, that suddenly there's going to be a snapback. And there's going to be that desire to, I can't let rogue agents go out there and spend our entire budget on one program that didn't work out. We as finance people and managers across the organization who have been through trouble, they become very risk averse very quickly. And that's why I would say, you know, the biggest recommendation we could have is to make sure that the budget and the planning process is not viewed as a finance exercise. All too often, that's what it is. Finance is here to shove a budget down my throat or cut back on my resources and control it and make sure that I have to get a purchase order for every paperclip I want to buy or pull from the storage cabinet. The budget shouldn't be a finance exercise. It should be a business exercise with engagement across the organization, across functions, that finance is facilitating, not imposing. We're there to help the business make decisions about things like resource allocations and flexibility and the target setting and forecasting. But we as finance need to get away from this idea that we are the powerful entity in the budget because we hold the purse strings. We are the facilitators of business decisions and the enablers of business agility by helping people understand the consequences and opportunities in the market.
Great. Thank you, Russ. Greg, what are your insights about what finance can do short of total organizational change to improve budgeting and planning?
There have been a lot of really good answers. I think we could start by learning, just being on this call today, understanding the different budget methodologies that are in use, I think is a great first step for finance professionals. I think then taking what you learn and what Russ said there about being a facilitator rather than the owner or controller, I've seen the best results come from that. When you let these people who are the closest to the business have that ability to act and decide, they typically want to do well. I think people generally want to do well and want to be recognized for what they do. That brings benefit to their organization. So helping, even if you have maybe a one-on-one review with your operations team leader, turning that into more of a future-looking meeting where you're talking about how can they impact change or helping them understand how they fit into the whole business model. I think that is a great second step after learning all the models that are out there, all the different processes that are out there. I also have to say too, in the integrated business planning model, built into that process it is an organizational change. So without having the ability to change the whole organization at once, we do have that access to communicate with our peers across the business. And so starting one person at a time, one group at a time, I think you can build a critical mass of business leaders, people who understand the model, and start moving forward that way.
Great answer. Thank you very much. We're going to go to another polling question. So again, audience, you can start answering this as soon as it comes up. But this is kind of a start to enter into a slight discussion of that today's most popular topic, artificial intelligence. This is kind of a yes/no question. So the statement is, we use AI in a significant way in our budgeting and planning process. The answers are yes, in the process, or a flat out no. So only 3 answers to choose from. I don't know. Greg, what do you think will be the answer here?
I'm going to have to go with no right now, unless all I've seen out there in the industry there's a lot of people selling AI tools to forecast sales. But that aside, I really haven't seen much out there. So I'm going to have to go with no.
No. Anybody disagree with that?
I'm expecting to hear in the process. Most people being in the because there are so many companies I'm talking to who they're not integrating it in a structural way yet, but they're toying with it. They're playing with it. And part of that because the landscape is changing so rapidly.
Okay, good point. And we're up to 75%, 77. That's kind of where we're stalling now. I think everybody's had time to refresh if they need to. So hopefully everybody that's going to answer has answered. So, a big no. Russ's optimism was slightly misplaced this time, but we give him credit for having it. Must be your IBM background coming through. Okay, let's. So the next panel question is on AI, and the question is: do you see AI as having a profound impact on budgeting today, or in, I guess, the reasonable future? Russ, you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, and yeah, maybe I was a little optimistic because I do see a lot of companies, as I said, playing with AI and trying it out to see where it fits in. And in fact, in the chat for this event, Vinay had pointed out that they are using AI in their budgeting process. I got to be clear. I believe that artificial intelligence in some way, shape, or form is going to be impacting every business process that we touch, for good or for ill, but I think it's going to be there. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people are using AI simply to automate their existing process. And as we've all talked about in a couple of times, automating an existing process that's a bad process is just making a bad process faster. What we really want to be doing is using AI to do the sense and respond that Gary talked about, the Darwinian approach, and using AI to understand, okay, what are the environmental factors that affect our sales and our volumes? Okay, once those sales and volumes are coming in, how is that impacting our internal organization, its productivity, its effectiveness, as well as its efficiency? And understanding the relationships to the inputs and the outputs of all of our business processes. If we're using it simply to make bad process faster, we're failing and we're not leveraging the technology. But the machine learning, the ability to look at a dramatically more complex environment than we humans can process, and find all the connections between changes in the market and changes in our business outcomes and how we can leverage those. I think that's where AI is going to be very, very useful for the finance community in forecasting and in planning.
Okay. Bjarte, I understand you have some thoughts on AI in this process.
Well, I keep getting the question from people about what will AI mean within this area. And I've got one insight and one concern. And my simple insight is that I don't have a clue. I simply don't have a clue. Of course, it will have an impact, but what it will be, God knows. My concern, just what Ross talked about, my big concern is that this will be used to simply automate processes to make them more effective, flawed processes that should have been changed and not made more effective. So that's my big concern. But the impact, I mean, no. I don't have a clue.
Greg, do you have any thoughts on what on the impact of AI?
I think it's coming. Like I said before, though, I haven't seen much out there just yet where people, I think, will be ready to turn over their trust to it. I think I've seen too many times in my own experience where the operations and sales teams don't even trust what I'm doing. So it's hard for me to believe that they're going to trust a machine to do better than that. So I think it really is a trust thing when it comes down to it. And I think we as humans, we don't give our trust too easily. So it's coming. It's like Russ said, it's definitely coming and it's going to touch everything. But I think getting over that trust hurdle is going to be, at least it'll slow it down a little bit.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the next question. We've gone kind of at the organizational level. We've talked about some things maybe finance can do, but most public companies, most large organizations have a board of directors. And of course, the board's aware of the budgeting process. But I want to explore just for a minute what you guys think the role of the board is in improving the budget process. We'll start with Greg. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I think what I've seen from boards and the budget process is when they don't trust, their job is to kind of keep the executives in check. I think we can agree on that. If they don't trust the executives and the numbers and the summary numbers that they're bringing to them, I think they're going to be focused on questioning the model and the plan and just the overall budget number rather than focusing on what they, in my opinion, should be focused on, which is really more of directing company through headwinds and tailwinds, helping the executives look into the future, being more future-based versus historical-based. Whenever I've seen a board not trust the numbers coming up to them, that's when I see those target-based numbers. The top-down approach is really a result of that lack of trust, I believe. So if you have a process like an integrated business planning or just a more detailed resource driver-based approach or beyond budgeting, where you can actually show that you have actionable data that is being used in the business daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and that data is being summarized for the board, I think those buffers, the budgetary slack, really comes to light a lot quicker, and it gives more trust from the bottom to the top. And I think it'll help them avoid giving top-down numbers that really are demoralizing for the people underneath. So that's my answer.
All right, thank you. Gary, what do you think the board's role is in improving the budget process?
Let me describe the board of directors sort of as time evolutionary. I think many years ago, it was primarily ceremonial. You showed up, the quarterly meeting, you got a nice check, you got on the plane and flew home. Then Enron came about. And I think that woke up a lot of board of directors that, hey, this isn't just ceremonial. We got to take this governance responsibility more seriously. Okay. So now we're on the journey of taking it more seriously. But now I want to transition into this whole barriers and obstacles that slow the adoption rate of corporate performance management methods that include budgeting and costing and so forth. The key is understanding. So earlier we talked about leadership. I think there's sort of like a kissing cousins here. The board of directors needs knowledge and understanding of what progressive methods are rather than those traditional that we've already described, later incremental budgeting and so forth. So to me, the board of directors have an important opportunity to, if you will, influence the executive team to basically be progressive, but it's all going to require understanding. Without awareness and understanding, you're pretty much stuck with the status quo, same as, except for doesn't even play into it.
Okay, thank you. Bjarte, what do you think about the role of the board in the budgeting process?
Well, first of all, I mean, the board is often used as an excuse for not going beyond budgeting because executives or finance people will say that the board requests the budget. The board, they ask for a budget because they've never thought that there was anything else they could ask for. And again, I'm coming back to the separation of the budget purposes. By doing that, the board will be more than happy because instead of being presented with what I call polluted budget numbers, where you never know which of these purposes were pulling the numbers which way, the board would get a realistic expected outcome forecast that they know they can trust. They would also get to see and improve the more ambitious targets that the company has, and they would be explained how cost will now be managed in a much more effective way. So they will be more than happy. But it is one of these myths that we can't do it because of the board. It's the same with the banks. People say that banks want budget. Well, they ask for budget for the same reason. That they never thought that there was anything else to ask for. But of course, the board has to be on board at one point. It really have to start with a board. Can come somewhat later. It doesn't have to be the starting point. Some people also say that, well, we are listed, so we can't do this. Exactly, it's the same excuse. I mean, the market seldom asks for budgets; they ask for performance. So the barrier is not banks and boards and so on. The barrier sit in the heads of people in the organization, executives, managers, finance people. Because the challenging thing here is that we not just have to change what we do, we have to change how we think. And that's the painful part, also for boards.
All right, thank you. Russ, what do you think about the role of the board in improving the budget process?
Yeah, I may come at this from a little bit of a different perspective. When I think about the role of the board is to help ensure the organization's strategic mission is being accomplished, and that they're there to represent the interests of the shareholders, the members, the stakeholders, depending on the organization. I don't view it's the role of the board to be deeply engaged in the operational aspects of the organization, what process they use for this or that. Interestingly, all three of the other panelists mentioned trust and trust in the organization. That trust has to be in the CEO or the head of the organization, and that head of the organization is running their organization with an eye on efficiency, effectiveness, and yes, innovation. Those are all the strategic underpinnings that should be a part of every board meeting. Every board meeting, we should be asking about the strategy and the alignment to all of our activities in accomplishing the strategic goals. That should be an all year round type of thing. It shouldn't be reserved for the meeting where the budget gets approved. To a certain extent, the budget approval should, in theory, be a rubber stamp because of the trust in the organization and the fact that we've been talking about strategy and priorities throughout the year, not just when the budget comes up for approval. And so it's not necessarily the role of the board to demand or to drive changes in the internal budgeting process. They should be able to say, hey, our strategic objectives include being innovative, include being informed, include managing the organization effectively. But they've got to leave that big picture in the hands of the CEO to manage the organization the way that they see fit.
All right. Thank you, Ross. That's a great response on what the board can and should do. So we're actually getting close to the end. We're going to open it up for some audience questions here, just very quickly. And I'm looking for a quick answer on this. How can the performance management SIG special interest group play a role in helping finance professionals to improve the budget process? Gary, you have a few quick thoughts on that?
Education. That's a really quick and short. An educated person has the ability to basically impact change. So what the PM SIG has, and appreciate Hessel Brauer in Switzerland organizing this from the get-go, and I'm a 30-year IMA member, is creating a platform where knowledge can be shared, and with knowledge comes actions.
Okay, great. Ross, you've been around IMA. I know you're a very long-time member in addition to having been on staff. Do you have any thoughts on what the performance management SIG could do to help?
Gary just hit it perfectly. It's learning from others' experience. It's sharing ideas and best practices. And we all work in our organizations and we all get used to the way that our organizations do something, but there are hundreds of different ways to do anything within planning and budgeting and forecasting that other companies are doing. And I really appreciate the last couple of days we've been talking about on the SIG message board about EVA, the economic value added, and how that's implemented in organizations. And we talked about budgeting a little bit. We talked about the COSO model of corporate governance. So there's all these great ways that if people just ask the question, hey, how might I approach this issue, that issue, this change? There's a tremendous amount of experience and ideas and other perspectives in the members of the SIG that can be leveraged by any member who just goes out and asks. And at a minimum, we can all commiserate every fall about the budget we're building for next year.
Well, thank you. And I just want to add to that, it doesn't need to be formal education. I just want to encourage everyone, tell your story. Tell some of the good stuff, tell some of the funny things that maybe went way wrong, because you never know what's going to inspire an idea in someone else. So, Hessel,
Larry, Bjarte here. Larry, Bjarte here.
Oh, Bjarte, you'd like to? Sure, go ahead.
Could I just add on something here?
Please.
And I don't want to offend anyone, but as I said, this is very much about changing how we think and not changing just what we do. And again, I don't want to offend anyone, but maybe you should think about the name of your special interest group. You call it performance management. I think what we have been discussing is what Russ was hinting at. This is more about enabling performance than managing performance. And that is more than playing with words. That is two fundamentally different ways of addressing that million-dollar question: how can we get the best possible performance in our organizations? And I actually struggle a little bit with the label performance management, even if I had it in my title once. I used to be VP of performance management. But I think our ability to manage performance in today's business and people realities is somewhat limited compared to what we might like to think as finance people. So that is why we should think more in terms of enabling performance, which is what Beyond Budgeting is about.
Bjarte, thank you very much. That was a very insightful comment, and I think we'll certainly give that some thought. We were actually talking about the name just at our last little SIG management meeting. But I want to turn it over to Hessel for audience questions. Hessel, do we have any?
Yeah, we do have a few audience questions, and feel free to submit more questions. I'm going to start with actually two questions from Benjamin. And Benjamin, you asked more questions. I think some of them will have already been answered along the way. And if there's more follow-up questions, please do add them. But the first question is, we talked a lot about kind of this change management process, but really, what is the place to start? What is kind of the step one to do? And Larry, I'll let you allocate the questions, if that's all right.
Okay, let's see. We'll go to Ross. You can take that one first.
So it's a challenge. It's a challenge to keep processes flexible while sensing in a volatile market, and some of it relies on. It depends on what you mean by having a reliable process. I mean, the goals that we talked about earlier. Bjarte talked about target setting and forecasting and resource allocation. Your budget can be effective in doing that. If that's how you're defining reliability, your budget can be effective for addressing that by just making sure that you're changing your mindset to base it based upon drivers in the environment as opposed to drivers only within your management system. It is a mindset change, and let's face it, Bjarte has been saying this in almost every answer. To change the way we use budgets to be more effective, we have to change our mindsets first, and change the way that we think about performance management to performance enablement.
Bjarte, I guess I better call on you since Russ quoted you. Maybe you want to add a bit to that?
If I can, I'm again coming back to the separation of the budget purposes, because one benefit of separating is that you can then organize each of these three processes: target setting, forecasting, and resource allocation, on a cadence, on a rhythm that reflects kind of your business in a much better way. Meaning that you wouldn't change targets that often. Forecasting should, of course, change more often. And as I touched upon, resource allocation should take place much more continuous. So it's one of the principles in Beyond Budgeting. Make your processes more business-driven, more event-driven, and less calendar-driven. We are not saying that you can kick out the calendar in all contexts, but where it's possible, where it makes sense, make these processes, again, more business-driven, more event-driven. That makes you more flexible without losing any reliability, on the contrary.
Okay, Hessel, do we want to move to the next question?
Yes, a question just came in. I'm going to read that. And actually, to touch on that, I had a question, Bjarte. When we talk about three different processes, maybe this is really a finance habit, right? How do you reconcile those three, or maybe in a different way? So how are those three cadences connected with each other?
Well, they don't necessarily. If you take targets, I mean, if you set yourself a a relative target of being in the first quartile among competitors. That is not the target you can make a forecast against. So you have actually decoupled target setting and forecasting by doing that. You will still do forecasting on your expected own performance to see that you are moving in the right direction, but you can't connect target and forecast like you would kind of think in more traditional ways. And again, of course, there is a link between forecasting and resource allocation, because in this model you do continuous cash forecasting, and if that cash forecast is telling you that you need to tighten your spending for a while, or vice versa, well, that is the link that you use forecasting for the purpose of forecasting, namely decision making, in this case on making cost decisions.
Okay, Hessel, you want to move to another question?
Yeah, so a great question came in, and from Michael, actually, talking about improving the budget process. If you had one example of a company that you are allowed to share the name of that has a really impressive budgeting process, which would that be? And maybe all of the panelists would have some examples in their experience.
Well, let's go to Greg first, since we gave the last one to Russ and Bjarte. Greg?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny question, and funny that you asked me first. The book Good to Great actually mentions two companies that I worked for, and they weren't mentioned in a positive light in that book, though. They were companies that were going from good to worse. And one thing that I noticed and learned from those companies, they had very old budgeting techniques, and I won't name those companies. If you looked at my LinkedIn, you'll see where I worked. But they used the very old budgeting techniques, which really hammered home that those techniques don't work. So I won't name any companies that are doing it well, but I have had experience with companies that don't do it well.
Gary, you have any companies that you can cite that you've seen do this very well?
My frustration is the slow adoption rate. So no one's really met my high standards of driver-based rolling budgeting using unit level consumption rates, thinking like an industrial engineer. I have seen, since forecasting is an important part, I don't know if I should be able to use this term, but there is a company called RealWare. I co-authored an article with them, and they use what's called ensemble forecasting. What ensemble forecasting is taking 5 different forecasting methods, and then it's kind of like a weighted composite average of it. So you just may want to look at the term ensemble forecasting. The analytics community knows what that's all about.
Bjarte, I suppose you still have the round table, so you hear from companies, I think, fairly regularly. Do you have anything you'd like to mention here?
Absolutely. I could have spent the next hour sharing great case stories from around the world. So we don't have the time. So one example, this is a Swedish bank called Handelsbanken that operates in Northern Europe, quite big in the UK, 700 branches, 12,000 employees. This bank has no budgets, no targets, no individual bonus, and they have been doing this since 1970. But it doesn't stop here. This bank has been performing better than the average of their competitors every single year since 1972. It's simply amazing, and the way they have achieved this is through beyond budgeting. A lot of autonomy, a lot of empowerment, a lot of transparency, extremely dynamic and flexible. And again, it has turned out to be extremely good news for the bottom line of this company. Okay. I could give you one other quick example. the public sector, because interesting stuff is starting to happen here. We have a Norwegian municipality, 12,000 inhabitants, going beyond budgeting as the first one worldwide, going for self-managed teams, and they've seen, without cost budgets, they've seen cost reductions of up to 50% in these self-managed teams. So this is not just a private sector model, it's just as relevant for the public sector.
Well, great. That's a nice couple of positive stories to finish up on, because we are about out of time. Hopefully, those of you who are attending will take a moment and fill out an evaluation form. We would love to hear from you. I want to thank everybody for attending. I want to thank our panelists for sharing their knowledge, insights, and experience with us. And just a reminder, the continuing professional education forms will be emailed to you conceivably as soon as 1 hour, but it may take just a bit longer. So again, thank you all. I hope everybody learned something. I really appreciate everything the panel shared with us, and I hope you did too.